Hey everybody, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of my show, William Wallace for America. Today, I am with State Representative Jean-Paul Coussan. Jean-Paul, thank you so much for coming on.
Pleasure to be here this morning, yes.
Well, Jean-Paul, tell me, where is your district? Let's talk about where your district is first, and then we're going to talk about your legislation. We're on the last day of legislation. Representative Coussan is going to tell us about his legislation and what to expect coming out of it at the end of today. Where is your district?
Well, sure. My district's in Lafayette. I'm in the middle of Lafayette. So I basically have a city of Lafayette district, and it goes through kind of the commercial corridor, or should I say, kind of the the restaurant corridor along Johnson Street, Congress Street, UL Lafayette to the Acadiana Mall, dead center of town.
So you got UL in there.
I've got the Cajun Dome, Cajun Field, the residences where most of the staff and students live, but I don't have the campus proper. That's actually carved out and put into Vincent Pierre's district to my east, but I do carry a lot of the university property.
That's an interesting district. So we understand the demographics of it, but let's understand your legislation.
Okay.
So what legislation do you have going through this session that you want to talk about?
Well, let's start with the one that you just mentioned, UL. I did a property transfer for UL where they're going to acquire some property closer to campus and give up some property a little bit further away from campus for a fire station. They also did a land transfer whereby they picked up some property that will in the future be developed into a health sciences kind of center for UL, and they allowed the church, which is on campus, another piece of property on campus so that they can have a new facility there, the Catholic Church. So that's an interesting piece of legislation that's ultimately didn't get a lot of fanfare, but for Lafayette it will be tremendously important in our future and for the future of UL with its 20,000 students.
It's interesting because a lot of people talk about how much laws you guys pass up here, and they can kind of complain sometimes about how many laws. But I don't think people really realize that stuff like this, which is really good.
Yep.
I mean, UL's consolidating closer. They're giving some land to the fire department,
yep.
And it's good legislation. But a lot of people don't realize it takes a state legislature to do that.
We have some work to do over here.
So what else do you have?
So I had a really important bill dealing with orphaned and abandoned oil field wells. Being a Lafayette representative, with my background isn't personally in oil and gas, but my constituency is deep-seated in the oil and gas industry, my family as well. I carried a bill this year dealing with orphaned and abandoned wells, where we have decided to reduce the severance taxes to incentivize the reworking of these wells and bring them back into commerce, while on the backside to properly fund the plugging and abandonment of those wells and cleanup of the sites, because that's an important aspect of the orphan well program, is to actually get these wells cleaned up. So Senator Ale and I combined our two orphan well bills, where we finalized the bill saying that for the first 3 months of production, there will be zero severance tax paid, and then following that on these orphan wells, and then following that, the amount that otherwise would be paid to severance tax is going to go into a site-specific trust fund to fund the future cleanup of the site. So we think that's a great bill. Hopefully we get some of these wells reworked and back into production and then cleaned up, and we think the governor is going to sign that.
I love this idea because it not only shows that you're trying to bring business and industry and back into Louisiana by helping these oil wells get back up and running, by putting people to work, but also you're environmentally being conscious environmentally to make sure that the ones that can't be opened up are cleaned up. I like that.
What's really important, and I think you just mentioned it about the jobs, these aren't major companies, these are small mom and pops that do this type of work. So we're really trying to get our small businesses in the oil and gas industry back working again, and hopefully have a resurgence of the industry in the next couple of years, which we are expecting from a price standpoint. So hopefully that'll make these deals more economically feasible. One of the other important pieces of legislation I had was the voluntary self-audit bill. I carried it on behalf of the DEQ, Louisiana DEQ. It was an important piece of legislation for the petrochemical industry. That bill is now on its way to the governor for signature. The voluntary self-audit program is mirrored after an EPA program that's been in place since the 90s, although it's been tried in Louisiana 4 times since the 90s. Never been successful. We were able to push that legislation through, and we did it because we cooperated with the Department of Environmental Quality, with the administration, the governor's office, with some of the concerns from the environmentalist perspective, and then also, of course, from the industry perspective, where we excluded certain issues that are already required by law to be reportable. We're not saying that they cannot, they can avoid those reports. This is something in addition for companies that go to a higher standard, and we think it's going to bring in thousands of more reports to the DEQ from minor incidents. And while at the same time, yes, we're getting more reports, it's really showing a corporate citizenship aspect from the petrochemical industry that is going to be an important component of these companies, showing why they're a good part of our community.
So I guess instead of making companies feel like they got to hide things,
that's right,
and get penalized if they're caught, this is a way to say, look, if you come on out with it, we're not going to hit you hard. We're going to work with you, let you be a part of the community in our environment.
Yep.
So it's another environmental aspect that you're looking out for. I like that. You're thinking about business
really a win-win. It was a win-win. We obviously still need to get the governor to sign that, but we think that we took basically every vote was on a huge margin, 85-5 in the House, 36-0, 32-4, I think, in the Senate.
Large percent for large good.
With that, we think the governor should take a hard look at signing this and getting this bill into legislation. But specifically, it's because it's his department's bill.
So we got three pieces. What's your other piece of legislation going through?
Well, I was the chairman of a committee that saw at least 40 pieces of legislation come through. We had 4 5-hour hearings, which compared to other natural resources sessions, this has been some of our most controversial. We had a Menhaden issue, a pogie boat issue, which basically was a regulation, the first of its kind in Louisiana, regulating how close the Menhaden industry can fish to our coastal, in our coastal waters, to the coast. And that bill is in conference right now. The Coastal Conservation Association was asking for the limitations to be put in place, whereas right now they're under a gentleman's agreement. And so the bill had been amended through the process, basically going from 1 mile away from the shore, that the boats can't come any closer, all the way in Senate amendment, put it at 0.25, a quarter mile for most of the coast except for Grand Isle, where it was out to 3 miles, with some other variations in between. But there's basically right now, I think that bill is stalled because there's some disagreement about some small areas, whether they're going to be a mile out or a half mile or a quarter mile, which is not where you want to be on the last day of session.
Exactly.
They need to come to the table and make sure that when I understand that we're going to have a debate, but they need to have some of those fundamental agreements taken care of before they put it to the legislation, so we're not tinkering with these, 300 or 400 feet here or there on the last day of session. So I don't think that bill's going to move forward. However, I don't think the issue is going away with the Menhaden industry.
Well, I'm glad you pointed that out, because while I speak to a lot of legislators, sometimes they're talking about the bills they didn't get, sometimes bills about the ones they did get. But either way, I think the discussion needs to be had, and just shows that you're working hard for it. So in case the people missed that, on the last day here of session, what legislation of yours do you think you're going to get or not going to get? We know you're not going to get might get, or you don't know until we come out of the committee, the Menhaden one, but what about the other oil and gas orphan wells? How's that one? It's
all the way through.
All the way through.
All of my legislation that either came through my committee, that I was carrying, is either combined into other legislation or it's already been sent to the governor. And so, I'm pretty pleased with the work my committee did. And then just personally on my bills, I think we accomplished what we always seek to accomplish, which is to incentivize people to do good work and to try to create some jobs.
So one last question for you, speaking of jobs and speaking of session, it's the last day of session, and how many sessions have you had under your belt now?
I've been here since January of 2016.
All right.
So I've been here probably 12 sessions now.
Okay.
With all the special sessions.
Of all the sessions that you've been through, how would you rate this one? Is this one going to be the people of Louisiana are getting the most? They're getting the best deals? How would you rate this session?
This was a fiscal session.
Correct.
We had 900 pieces of legislation that ended up making 930 something that ended up getting heard throughout our committees, which is about average for a fiscal session. However, as I mentioned, I think we had some heavy hitting legislation that really was policy oriented, and the politics were all over the map. Some of those are still pending right now. We've got some transportation and infrastructure bills still pending today. We obviously have our construction budget bill still pending today. So we still have some heavy lifts left on this last day. But fortunately,
tax reform,
we got our tax reform done,
tax
where the tax reform was huge, okay, and the amount of work that was put into that. And the only reason I don't say that first is because it wasn't my committee. I'm thinking of my committee first.
No, absolutely.
But for me and my politics back home, you know, in my description, I liken it to the Trump tax cuts of 2017, where basically we reduced personal income rates and reduced corporate income rates, and we eliminated some exemptions and deductions so that it was a neutral bill, but from a tax policy standpoint, a revenue neutral bill, but from a tax policy standpoint, when you lower the rates, we look so much better for businesses that are seeking to relocate or start a business in Louisiana from a tax policy standpoint, because oftentimes they look at the rates first and they don't look at what you get on the backside for exemptions and deductions. In this case, we're going to be more in line with our neighboring states, and hopefully that'll help us grow our economy.
I love this. This is a great plan. So we'll hear about this at the end of the day today, you know, whether it got passed or not. And like you said, you're laser focused on your legislation for your district, and I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, we're not done. We have work to do, and I try to, you know, have an open office, constituent services throughout the year. But this was a difficult session, full of policy, difficult politics. We navigated through it. We're at the end of the day, end of the session now, almost to the finish line.
People are going to win this session, right?
I think the people are going to win.
I like that.
And it's just incremental changes. I think we're moving the state in the right direction.
I like that.
Yes, sir.
Well, Representative Coussan, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. Everybody else, as you know, you see this on YouTube and Facebook first. My podcast, William Wallace for America, please, everybody, and visit State Representative Jean-Paul Coussan's page. You'll hear a lot of the great things that he's doing for his district. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you, Willem.
Here we go.